Hi guys, Boris Johnson's sycophant and ex-Tory turned mayoral candidate for reform, Andrea Jenkyns, dismissed a story in the Mail on Sunday, a pro-Tory newspaper, which claimed that Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson are planning to work together in order to remove the Labour Party from power. Now, this story gave me a bit of a giggle, and it was dismissed by the newly defected Tory to Reform. Now, Andrea called it fake news and said that the goal of reform was to form a majority government instead. So what are the chances of Boris Johnson returning and co-leading a challenge against Labour? Well, first, have a listen to this.
Joining me now is the former Tory MP turned Reform Greater Lincolnshire mayoral candidate, Dame Andrea Jenkyns. Dame Andrea, lovely to see you today. Let me read you out the introduction to a story on page 5 of the Mail on Sunday, written by Glenn Owen, the political editor. Nigel Farage is prepared to work with Boris Johnson to defeat Labour in the national interest. Sources close to the Reform UK leader have told the Mail on Sunday. Discuss.
This is just fake news, Camilla. Look, I know Boris, I know Robert, they're both friends. I know Nigel, he's a friend, and this just has not happened. Or if it is, it's somebody so remote who doesn't have any authority. And look, we don't even know if Boris wants to come back onto the front line of politics. Nigel has already said we are pushing to form a majority government. And so what I actually think this is Camilla, is this is Kemi's team briefing the media to make out that, number one, because they're behind in the polls, so to make it out that Robert is trying to do a deal that Nigel cannot get a government in his own right, and to try and discredit Robert. And I did see it myself when I was in government, Camilla. I remember, when I was a Conservative, I remember a story being briefed, and I asked Boris and Kerry about this, where it said that Rishi had come out and said that Boris he'd rang and spoke to Boris and he was going to help him campaign, and no such phone call happened. So we know that leaders of the opposition, governments, they do brief stuff like this, and I think it's a deflection tactic, and it is, I'm afraid, fake news, Camilla.
Okay, look, I don't know whether it's fake news or not. Like, we're talking about Boris Johnson here, so he's not exactly somebody who has a comfortable relationship with the truth. So it's possible that Boris Johnson is considering rejoining. Now, what about Kemi Badenoch here? You have a pro-Tory newspaper, the Daily Mail or the Mail on Sunday, promoting the idea of Boris Johnson replacing Kemi Badenoch instead of supporting Kemi Badenoch. Now, could this actually happen? Well, it's highly unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's highly unlikely for a number of reasons. First of all, Boris Johnson would have to get back into Parliament. Now, there would have to be some sort of campaign, whether he would lead it or somebody would campaign on his behalf to get him a seat. Now, how would that happen? Well, there would have to be a by-election, or somebody would have to step aside and allow Boris Johnson to win that seat. Now, Boris Johnson is not all that popular. He's popular with some members of the Conservative Party, but with the public, I don't think Boris Johnson is all that popular. Now, they could try and engineer a way for Boris Johnson to win a seat. They could find a by-election that's a strong Tory seat, and then allow Boris Johnson to be the candidate and throw a huge amount of support behind him. But that would require Kemi Badenoch or whoever's leader of the Conservative Party at the time supporting that. But then why would Kemi Badenoch support the idea of Boris Johnson joining the Conservative Party? It would be the end of her career, because Boris Johnson, of course, would take over. Or there would be people in his party, in the Conservative Party, that would want him to take over. So that's the first stumbling block. Boris Johnson would have to win a seat, and it's not guaranteed. Then he would have to reach out to Nigel Farage. But we know that Farage doesn't want to work with the Tories, at least for now. He wants to replace the Tories. He keeps talking about how the Tories were a disaster. The rhetoric is pretty toxic towards the Conservatives, and Farage wants to win Conservatives over. And he's not going to do that if he's talking about having a pact with the Conservatives. Now, once again, we're too far away from a general election to make any real predictions. So it's possible that in the run-up right before the election in 2028 or 2029 or whenever it takes place, that Farage and the Conservatives bury the hatchet somewhat or in some way and form some sort of non-aggression pact where they will step aside in certain seats to allow the Conservatives to win that seat if Reform don't have a chance, or Conservatives step aside to help Reform if they don't have a chance. But we're too far out from that. So this idea that Boris Johnson would lead the Conservatives is a bit for the birds, at least for now. I don't see it happening in the medium and short term. But, politics is strange at the moment and anything could happen. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.